Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today we're looking into the Baltic Sea cable incidents
Yeah, these are fascinating.
and trying to answer a pretty big question. Are these just accidents?
Mm.
Or is there something more going on?
Uh,
Like, are we seeing a new kind of geopolitical conflict?
yeah, a conflict that's playing out under the waves. It's a really important question.
Definitely. Especially when you think about how much countries like the Baltic states depend on those undersea connections for power, for the internet, for everything.
Exactly. I mean, we always hear about internet cables getting cut, right?
Right.
But those undersea power cables, those are just as vulnerable. And if those get disrupted,
Oh, that could be a huge problem.
especially for a region like the Baltic Sea.
So let's dive into the details.
Mm.
Recently, two internet cables were cut in the Baltic Sea,
Yep.
which caused some pretty big disruptions between Finland and Central Europe. And a lot of people started pointing fingers at Russia right away,
Mm.
especially because this happened, well, right after President Biden gave the okay to send those long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine.
Oh, interesting.
So the timing is definitely suspicious.
It is. And Russia definitely has the capability to pull something like this off.
Oh, yeah.
There's a report from the NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence, and it goes into a lot of detail about Russia's underwater capabilities.
Mhm.
They've got this specialized base, Selenia Guba, where they keep a whole fleet of vessels, and these vessels are designed for, well, deep sea operations.
Sounds pretty serious. So they have the tools.
hmm
But do we know if they've actually used them for this kind of thing before? I mean, messing with undersea cables?
Oh, they have. There's this one vessel, the Yantar, that's particularly interesting.
Okay.
It's got submersibles, underwater drones, all sorts of things that could be used to tamper with cables.
Huh.
And Western officials, they've been worried about this ship for a while now. They've seen it acting suspiciously near undersea cables in different parts of the world.
So we've got motive, we've got the means, we've got a history of suspicious activity.
Yeah, it's all starting to add up.
Seems pretty straightforward, right? Case closed.
Well, not so fast. There's another piece to this puzzle, and it involves a Chinese cargo ship, the Yi Peng 3. This ship was detained by the Danish Navy.
Hmm.
And guess where?
Near the cables.
Right near where the cables were cut.
Now that's interesting.
And here's the thing. This ship, before it was anywhere near those cables,
Yeah.
it had just left a Russian port.
Wait a minute. Are we saying that Russia and China are working together to, like, disrupt the internet in the Baltic Sea?
Well, we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Right.
But the presence of that Chinese ship, it definitely raises some eyebrows. It's a new wrinkle in this story.
It is. I mean, why would China even get involved in this? This isn't exactly their backyard.
That's the big question.
Right.
Are they just testing the waters, seeing how much they can get away with?
Mm-hmm.
Are they trying to take advantage of a tense situation?
It's strange.
Yeah.
This isn't even the first time a Chinese ship has been linked to damage of undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea.
Right.
Remember the Baltic Connector pipeline incident back in 2023?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. Another Chinese ship dragging its anchor and causing all sorts of damage.
It makes you wonder, are these isolated incidents? Or is there a pattern here?
A pattern of Chinese involvement.
Yeah. And if there is a pattern, what does it mean? Are they working alone? Or are they, collaborating with Russia?
Those are the questions we need to answer.
This is getting complicated. But let's focus on the Baltic Sea region for a second.
Okay.
There was an article in Euronews that called it Europe's Achilles heel when it comes to undersea infrastructure.
And it's not hard to see why.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got multiple undersea cables crisscrossing the region, connecting the Baltic states to the rest of Europe.
It's a vital network.
It is. For their energy, their internet, their economies. If those connections get disrupted, even for a short time.
The impact could be huge.
Exactly. And here's another thing to consider. The Baltic states are about to disconnect from that Russian-led electricity ring, the Braille system.
Oh, right.
Which means they'll be even more reliant on undersea cables for their power.
Talk about bad timing.
It is. It makes them incredibly vulnerable to accidents, to sabotage, to anything.
And we've already seen suspected sabotage in the region, haven't we?
You've got the Baltic Connector incident, and there was also damage to a cable between Finland and Estonia. And guess what?
Another Chinese ship.
You got it. It's a region under pressure. And it's not just the Baltic Sea either. This whole thing raises some serious questions about undersea infrastructure globally.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, you know how much of the world's internet traffic relies on these undersea cables?
I don't know a lot.
95%. 95% of international internet traffic goes through these cables.
Wow, that's almost all of it. So if someone really wanted to disrupt things, this would be the way to do it, huh?
Exactly. It really highlights how fragile our interconnected world is. We depend so much on this network of cables, but we hardly ever think about it.
True. Okay, so those cables are essential, they're vulnerable, and it seems like they're caught in the middle of all these geopolitical tensions. But let's get back to the main mystery here.
Okay.
Who's behind these Baltic Sea incidents? Is it Russia on its own? Or could China actually be involved?
Well, let's look at the evidence. We talked about that NATO report on Russia's underwater capabilities, right?
Yeah.
They've got the tools, the motive, the history. It all points to them.
But then there's that Chinese ship, the Yi Peng 3, and the Baltic Connector incident back in 2023. Another Chinese ship. That can't all be coincidence, can it?
It's possible, but it is strange, isn't it? All these Chinese ships in a region that's so strategically important. If China is involved, the question is why? What would their motivation be?
Yeah, what's in it for them? It's not their territory.
Right. Maybe they're just testing the water.
Testing the waters.
Yeah, seeing how the West reacts to this kind of disruption.
So probing for weaknesses, seeing how we respond.
Exactly. And it would fit with how assertive China has become on the world stage. I mean, look at the South China Sea, the whole Huawei 5G controversy.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to push the limits.
True. But wouldn't this kind of thing damage their relationships with Europe? I mean, messing with undersea cables, that seems counterproductive.
Maybe in the short term. But China tends to play the long game.
Ah, so they're willing to take some hits now if it helps them in the long run.
Exactly. It's a calculated risk. But okay, let's say, just for argument's sake, that China is involved. What about Russia? Are they working together, or is China acting alone?
That's a good question.
One possibility is that Russia and China have some sort of agreement, even if it's unspoken. Russia's under a lot of pressure from the West right now. Maybe they see this as a chance to team up with China, take advantage of their willingness to shake things up.
So Russia provides the expertise, maybe some logistical support, and China provides the people and the plausible deniability.
Exactly. And it would be hard to trace back to either of them directly.
It's a powerful combination.
It really is. And it shows how geopolitical competition is changing in the 21st century. It's not just about traditional military conflicts anymore.
Right.
It's about economic leverage, disinformation, cyber attacks, and now maybe sabotage of critical infrastructure. It's a whole new kind of warfare.
A lot to keep track of. But it all comes back to one crucial question. How do we protect those undersea cables?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about some ideas like redundancy, better security, working more closely with companies, but honestly, those feel kind of small compared to the threat we're facing.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to think beyond just protection. We need to think about resilience. It's systems that can handle disruptions, that can recover quickly, and that can adapt as the threats evolve.
So a stronger, more flexible internet, one that isn't so dependent on these cables. How would we even do that?
Well, it would mean looking at different communication pathways, things like satellite networks, maybe even decentralized internet architectures that aren't so vulnerable to a single point of failure. It's a long-term project for sure.
It sounds like it.
But if we want a truly resilient digital world, it's something we need to think about.
Yeah, I guess so. But that would require a lot of change, a lot of investment. I don't know if there's the political will to make that happen.
It's a valid concern,
Yeah.
but I do think the sense of urgency is growing.
Oh, yeah.
Look at NATO, for example. They've set up a new center specifically to protect undersea pipelines and cables, and they're working on something called a Digital Oceans Initiative.
What's that?
It's all about improving maritime situational awareness, basically being able to keep a closer eye on what's happening in the oceans.
Oh, that's good. So NATO's starting to take this seriously. What about individual countries? Are they doing anything?
A lot of them are. We're seeing more naval patrols, more investment in new technologies, and better cooperation between governments and companies. I think the Baltic Sea incidents were a wake-up call.
Yeah, it seems like it.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. International cooperation, national initiatives, technological advancements.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. But the important thing is that we're not helpless. There are things we can do to address this threat. It's not insurmountable.
Yeah.
It really is. And finding the right balance, well, that's the tricky part. But we can't just ignore this problem, you know?
Definitely not. The stakes are way too high. And those Baltic Sea incidents, I think they were a wake-up call for a lot of people.
I think so, too. It feels like we're moving into a new era, you know?
Yeah.
Where critical infrastructure becomes a target. It's a bit unsettling when you think about it.
It is. I mean, imagine a world where internet blackouts are just normal.
Right.
where financial markets are constantly being thrown into chaos.
And communication networks are down all the time.
Essential services like healthcare and transportation constantly disrupted.
It could lead to widespread panic,
Yeah.
societal instability. I mean, the potential consequences are enormous.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, almost. But it's not that far-fetched, is it?
No, it's not. We've already seen cyber attacks on power grids, hospitals, things like that. This would just be taking it one step further.
Actually physically cutting those connections.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's a pretty low-cost, low-risk strategy for causing a lot of chaos.
You don't need a huge military operation to damage a cable.
Nope. A small team of divers, a well-placed explosive, even a ship dragging its anchor.
And it's almost impossible to prove who's responsible, especially in international waters. So how do we even stop this kind of thing if we can't figure out who's doing it?
It's a tough one. Our traditional ways of deterring aggression, like military threats, they don't really work here.
Right.
We need to be more creative, find new strategies, new ways of thinking about security in a world where the lines between war and peace are getting blurrier all the time.
So what are some of those new strategies? We talked about a few things like redundancy, fortifying the cables, working more closely with companies. But I don't know, those feel a bit like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Are they really enough?
They're a start, but yeah, we need to think bigger, more strategically. It's about resilience, not just protection.
Right.
We need systems that can take a hit and keep going, systems that can bounce back quickly, and systems that can adapt to new threats as they pop up.
So we need a more robust and flexible internet, one that's not so reliant on these vulnerable cables. But what would that even look like?
It would mean diversifying our communication pathways,
Okay.
exploring alternatives like satellite networks, maybe even looking into decentralized internet architectures, systems that don't have a single point of failure. It's a long-term vision, sure, but it's worth considering if we're serious about resilience.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But it's a huge undertaking. It makes you wonder if there's enough political will, enough global cooperation to actually pull it off.
It's a valid concern, but there are signs of progress.
Oh, yeah.
Like what? Well, like we said, NATO is taking this seriously. They've set up a new center to protect undersea infrastructure. And they're working on that Digital Oceans Initiative to improve maritime awareness.
Right, right. So NATO's stepping up. What about individual countries? Are they doing anything?
Yeah, a lot of them are. We're seeing increased naval patrols, investments in new technologies, and closer collaboration between governments and private companies. I think those Baltic Sea incidents really got people's attention.
Yeah.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. International cooperation, national initiatives, technological advancements. We need all of it.
It's a lot of moving pieces.
It is.
Yeah.
But the important thing is we're not powerless. There are things we can do. We just need to act.
Absolutely. And this brings us to our final thought for today. These cable incidents, they might seem like something that's happening far away, but they could affect all of us.
Yeah,
I mean, the internet is so deeply ingrained in our lives now.
it is.
We use it for communication, for work, for access to information.
Everything.
If those connections are disrupted, even temporarily, it could have a ripple effect on everything.
Our economies, our societies, even global security.
It's not just a tech issue or a geopolitical issue. It's a human issue.
It is. And it's something we all need to be aware of. We need to understand these vulnerabilities, adapt to these new threats, and work together to protect those connections that are so vital to our digital lives.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the technical details of undersea cables to the complex world of geopolitics. But really, we've just scratched the surface.
We have. There's so much more to explore, and we'd encourage everyone listening to do just that. Dive deeper into the sources we've talked about, follow the investigations, and stay tuned for new developments. This story is far from over.
Yeah, it's definitely a story worth following. And who knows, maybe you'll uncover something we missed. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely.
Connect with us on social media, share your insights. Let's keep this conversation going.
Remember, knowledge is power. And in a world where information flows like water, it's more important than ever to stay informed, stay curious, and keep exploring.
Until next time, everyone.